Well, hey, welcome to A Valid Answer with Scott and Marshall, the show where a liberal, socialist liberal atheist dukes it out verbally and ideologically with a capitalist conservative Christian pastor. So you see our names right there, atheist, pastor, if this is your first time. Welcome to A Valid Answer. We are so glad you're here. You can catch us every Sunday night at 5 and now Monday afternoons at 4. So we're doing 2 different shows, and today our producer is my son Gabriel, and we just want to say thank you, a shout out to him for helping make this happen. And we're trying not to be too offensive today, or are we trying to be really offensive? You tell us.
You're probably going to try to be offensive.
Why would you say that?
I'm offended. Yeah.
I'm going to talk about it, the difference between offending someone and being offended. I think there's a difference. There's a big difference.
Me, Scott. Well, actually, I think it's a pretty serious topic. We're going to talk about political correctness tonight. We're going to talk about being offended and all of that. I think it's a big deal. Scott might feel a little differently about it.
I think it's a big deal, but we may not be on the same side of.
We are not on the same side of the issue
of what it is. So
we are not on the same side. So
you don't believe in freedom of speech?
I do believe in freedom of speech, but I also believe in not being a jerk to people.
Well, I mean, but don't you believe that freedom of speech allows you to be a jerk to people?
Yeah, but then there's a consequence for that.
Well, this has been a valid answer.
There are consequences for when you are a jerk, and so
really,
you're
what kind of consequences?
You're not going to be insulated from those consequences.
Really, what kind of consequences? And who gets to decide what the consequences are, and who gets to decide when the consequences are given?
That's an easy question. First of all, if you have a contract, right?
Yeah.
And if you say something, if you violate your work contract, let's say you're a media personality or you're in a workplace.
Absolutely.
And, right? But also society at large gets a say. It's the court of public opinion. Whether you like it or not, it's real. And it does impose punishment on people who do and say things that they shouldn't be doing and saying, even if what they do or say is perfectly legal. A great case in point, even though it's not exactly in the PC realm, it's in a related realm, which is the Me Too movement. Look at Neil deGrasse Tyson, who I've always enjoyed all of his work and his shows and everything. He's always been one of my heroes. Unfortunately, it appears that he has committed some ethical breaches. At least these are alleged still, but come on.
Well, you said earlier he should be removed anyway, even though they're only alleged.
Mm-hmm. Well. At least suspended while investigated, right? Okay.
That's what you said.
But the bottom line is,
he shouldn't be on college campuses. He shouldn't be teaching.
He engaged in some behavior that most of us would describe as either inept or creepy behavior, if you will. Mm-hmm. He hit on some women and came on pretty hard. When these women reported to him, they were directly under him. They were in subordinate relationships, which is an ethical issue.
That's it. I mean, I don't want to confuse an ethical issue with a personal issue.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that so? Let's just say he was still a famous person, but these were with people who he did not. It was not a subordinate person that he was doing this to. That it was someone outside of his employment reach.
Mm-hmm. Then it becomes much more just a personal thing between him and his family members and his associates.
Yeah.
But again, the point that
are we talking about ethics or just political correctness in general?
Well, the point that I'm trying to make is there's still a social consequence for being caught up in this net, to be in these crosshairs. So I hope he gets his hearing. Whether it's in the court of public opinion or whatever. I don't think anything criminal has taken place from what I have read. Yeah. Nonetheless, he's in some hot water that you and I would not want to be in, precisely because he has violated some social norms.
Gotcha.
And if you violate social norms, such as by not being politically correct when you should be, then there's going to be a consequence.
Okay, I'm not trying to derail the conversation at all, but let's just say, so if a transgender person is violating social norms, shouldn't there? Are you okay with consequences for that?
There are consequences for that,
and you're okay with that.
That's how society works. So as long as those consequences don't violate a personal right, as long as they're not criminal consequences, like you're an Antifa protester, I don't like what you're saying, so I'm going to literally run you over.
Yeah.
Okay. So as long as personal rights are not violated, That's just how society works.
Okay, cool. I didn't want to derail us into that because we're not talking about that, but it made me think, well, now you're backing the idea of if you go against social norms, then it's okay for people to go ahead and punish you in the court of public opinion.
Well, social norms are always going to be violated. There's always going to be people out there kind of on the edge, pushing the edge of the envelope. There's this little parable from a guy named Franz Kafka. He was a modernist author, lived about a century ago, and he wrote little parables sometimes. He was Czechoslovakian. And he wrote this. It says, it's very short. Leopards break into the temple and drink to the dregs what is in the sacrificial pitchers. This is repeated again and again until it can be calculated in advance and it becomes part of the ceremony. So what the parable means is that you have something where it's very offensive to people. Polite society, the priests, if you will, are going to be very offended. They're literally violating a sanctified space. They're committing an act that is literally sacrilegious.
Yeah.
But the act is repeated so often, eventually it becomes normalized and then is later incorporated into the ceremony.
Just because, well, can't do anything about it, so might as well make it part of the ceremony.
Well, the zeitgeist changes. The attitude changes. So take a look. I mean, you're a pastor of the Foursquare Church, right?
Yes.
There was a day, probably a couple hundred years ago, when women were not really allowed to preach.
Right.
It was very, frowned upon. It was not common. It was exceedingly rare for a woman to, stand up and speak at all.
Well, it's not necessarily outside of the realms of the Bible, interestingly enough. Deborah, Esther.
Right.
Anyway.
Right. There were, and you look at Quaker communities and stuff, there were communities even going back
Lydia,
400 or 500
Tabitha.
years where women would preach, but it wasn't typical.
Yeah, no, it wasn't typical.
But today, most people, unless you are in the Catholic Church, and maybe a few other churches that are still very conservative with this regard, most churches employ women pastors. It's part of the ceremony. 500, 200 years ago, that might have been very offensive. Today, if a woman were to stand up and put on a clerical collar in a Catholic church and try to, celebrate Mass, that would be super offensive to most Catholics. But in 100 years from now, who knows?
Yeah. But again, I look at it and what is the source of the offense? That's why.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, it's the difference between being offensive and being offended.
Okay.
In that, if you are so weak that something offends you and you have to tell someone that offends you, I think that says more about you than the person.
Do you think that's weakness? Why do you think being offended is weakness?
Because you are telling someone, I am giving you control over my emotions. I'm telling you that I've just given you control over my emotions. You offend me and now I'm angry. I'm admitting to you that you now are controlling my emotions. I think that's weakness.
I like your use of the word control because I think that gets to the heart of the problem.
Yeah. When you say I'm offended by what you're doing, you are admitting that person has control over your emotions. And that's why I want us to be a society that isn't offensive and isn't offended. Because you should go out of your way to not intentionally offend someone. But at the same time, you shouldn't allow your lifestyle to change because someone is offended by your lifestyle.
I've got Michel Foucault up here, and I don't quite have a concise quote. He talks about a thing called biopower. He's a French philosopher and historian, passed away in the 80s, very famous, very influential. Talked about a thing called biopower, which is how societies kind of control their members, how people are controlled. And one of the ways that people are controlled is literally through speech, through discourse. And so when you label a person, you are actually applying a form of social control to that person. And it may not be what we call hard power, where I'm going to put a knife to your throat or a gun to your head and say, you will do this. It's a more subtle form of control, but it's also extremely powerful.
This is why I'm always with you. I'm always so, hey, we have to make sure we are talking about the actual definition of the word, because I know that words are important.
It's a sticking point for you.
It's a sticking point for me, because some people who don't care about that will say, well, that's just semantics. Well, the meanings of words have meaning.
Right. It
And
matters.
when you control the language, you control the argument. Which is what you're talking about in that situation where they're saying once you put a label on someone, now you're asserting control, societal control, some sort of societal control over that person because you're now controlling the language. So control the language, control the argument. So
That's just like the here's an example, and I don't want to go off on this tangent.
Right.
There's so many tangents we could go on. Is it a fetus or is it an unborn baby or a person?
right.
You know, that it's exactly that. You know, we're all talking about the same exact thing, and we all know that we're talking about the same thing.
Well, you know it. No, we're not going to.
Right, you know, but the language in which
Sometime we're going to have to hit that
argument makes a
topic though,
difference.
because that's one topic that we actually haven't hit yet.
Yeah, I think we've resisted it. You know, part because I think it's low hanging fruit. It's almost too easy.
Yeah,
You know, too
not
cliche.
too cliche. I would say
Yeah,
too cliche,
yeah.
not too easy. I don't want to offend somebody, but I was thinking that.
Well, we're not trivializing it.
No.
You know, but yeah.
Hey, can you pull this up because I can't see the rest of their comment?
I'd have to pull up
You'd have to do your job.
Face, Instagram,
Yeah,
MySpace
Facebook,
post,
all that kind of
whatever.
stuff. Yeah,
Let
we
me
we
do
have
that.
some. For whatever reason, my iPad only shows part of the comment. When I try to see more, it just puts the emojis up, and I can't see what the rest of it is. So for whatever reason, his iPad seems to work a little bit better.
Okay, Lance. Hi, Lance. Lance is saying political correctness, aka censorship of speech, is at the doorstep of communism. Why is that bad? If you don't
my
like
gosh.
something, he says communism like it's a bad thing.
It is.
If you don't like something, then don't watch it or listen to it. Why must we go down this dark path? People can find anything to be offended about? And I do agree with that. You can easily be offended.
Exactly.
You can take offense with things,
Now,
pretty easy.
It seems that you kind of stand on the side that you think that there should be some political correctness, that it carries some good. Tell us a little bit about that, because I cannot
Right.
stand political correctness. I don't see that it accomplishes anything other than silencing people you want to disagree with. So I really, really, really am against political correctness, but I'm interested to see what positives you think you find from it.
Okay. Let's hit this kind of from a Christian perspective. The atheist pulling out the Christian perspective.
Right.
Let's say I tell you, Scott, that I've decided to go by my middle name. I'm no longer going to go by my first name, Marshall.
Okay.
I would like you to now call me by my middle name, David.
All right.
Okay, so when you see me next and you say hello, are you going to say hello, Marshall, or hello, David?
I'll probably say hello, Marshall, because it's been 20 some odd years that I've called you that, and it's going to take me a while to change
To
over
get
to
used to
calling
the
you
middle
David.
name, but
Yes.
you're going to change, right?
I'll change it, yeah,
Why? Why would you do that for me?
because I personally don't want to intentionally offend you.
Okay, there you go. It's love, isn't it?
Yes.
Is it not love that
Yeah.
when you love people and they say, you know what, I prefer to be known this way,
Yep.
okay? Take a look at the African-American experience in American history. The N-word is how people used to refer to African-Americans.
Yep.
I remember even when I was young, the word Negro was still in common usage.
Yeah.
Today, we don't say that. We say African-American or we say black.
Yeah.
Same thing with Native
Now, on
Americans.
that, I've actually asked a couple of black friends, I'm like, what? This is why I say that. I go, do you want me to say African American? And he literally looked at me and said, I'm black. Call me black. What's no problem with that? What's the problem? What's the big deal? I'm like, okay.
But I like that you asked.
Yeah, because I'm like, I want to know what, but from those answers, from the few, 2 points is a straight line. Now you got now, is 2 points considered data?
Well, and then 3 points is a trend, right?
Yeah.
I get that.
But-
so what
so anyway,
what
go.
happens if, or let's take a look at the Native Americans to get me back on track.
Yep.
Initially, we called them Indians.
Yep.
Which for hundreds
Because
of
Columbus
years-
thought he made it to India.
Right. But as it turns out, that's like crazy offensive, right? That's not only is it inaccurate, it's simply wrong. And it's also, it's just bad on so many levels. And I think most people recognize that. So we've shifted to saying Indians, now we say Native Americans. But even that
Unless
is
you're from Cleveland.
Eurocentric. Native American
And you're a
is-
baseball fan.
I get it. Native Americans is a Eurocentric term, so now we're using the term indigenous. Even Native Americans are telling people we no longer want to be referred to as Native American. We prefer to be referred to by indigenous. And so I also personally have to change my thinking. I have to train myself not to say Native American, but to say indigenous, because it is a gesture of respect for these people I am recognizing their humanity. I am recognizing their equality with me. I am recognizing their unique heritage and place in history and on this land. I am taking my hat off to them and acknowledging. That's the least I can do. So that's where political correctness comes in. I get that for some people it can sound crazy. Look at the genders, right?
Yeah.
It used to be male and female, right?
Still
Boy,
is.
girl.
It still is.
Well,
but biologically and scientifically speaking, it still is.
And then it became
science says it still is. Anyway,
I don't want to go down that trail, but I think
we already did.
We have another show topic.
We already did that one, and we all know that I'm right about that because science.
Okay, so then it became LBGT, and then Q, and then P, and pansexual, and all these other things.
That's the weird thing, because it was Q when we were kids, but that was offensive. Now it's not offensive.
Right, you didn't use that word when we were kids. You still, I don't think, would use that word, but it's kind of been taken back. Like that community has taken back Q for themselves, and so all of this. And
I love it how they can use the word, and we're going, N-word, Q, whatever it is, within the community, but nobody else can.
But there's a reason for that. It's because, getting back to Foucault, the language has power. And when I am using, let's say I am using the N-word to describe an entire subset of our population, that's an exercise in white supremacy. That is a power move on my part. That is me virtue.
So it's not a power move when a black person uses it?
That is a it's sort of solidarity, because
which is power.
Right.
Solidarity is power, so it's still a power move.
But they are traditionally disenfranchised. So their efforts are trying to equalize, whereas if I were to use the same language, I'm trying to suppress. And since we all see equality as the objective.
Nope.
Well, I do.
Equal opportunity is the objective. Anyway.
Well, actually, equity is my objective, but whatever. Okay.
That's what makes you a communist.
Right. So the bottom line is.
And my enemy.
Well, fair enough. But I'm offended by the word communist. I want to be called socialist from now on.
Okay, communist.
But
I create all the graphics, so next time it's going to say communist.
Yeah, it's going to be in pink, isn't it? I know.
It's just going to say commie liberal atheist.
As long as we both have the same number of letters in our description. I'm joking, but you see, if you
ever look at it here, Gabe, go back to lower thirds. If you look at that on there, see, you're getting left to right and you're getting top to bottom. You're getting double billed. Because if you ever notice that movies, if you ever see two stars who really wanted top billing, they would put one name in the top left and the other name in the bottom right, because that person got top billing reading left to right, and this person got top billing reading top to bottom. Well, so I'm giving you double top billing.
So
I'm being nice.
That's not fair, is it?
No, it's not fair. But
we need to equalize that.
So what I'm going to do, since I control
fairness,
since I control it, I am just going to go and change it to where it says commie. Anyway,
okay,
Gabriel, you can go back to.
So there is a power dynamic there that's at work.
That was a tangent.
That's the reason, yes, and that's the reason why it's okay for one group to sort of label themselves and choose their own name or their own labels for themselves. But it's not appropriate for us to impose labels on other people, because that's controlling behavior. So if a person wishes to change their own name, that's their right. It is not my right to say, your name is Toby. It is a good name. Say your name, like on Roots, right?
Yeah.
So one of these is appropriate and the other one is inappropriate because of the power dynamic.
But because you change your name, why do I have to respect that? I know that I would, but why would I have to respect that?
You don't have to, but if you don't, then there may be a consequence.
Like what?
Well, it depends. Certainly it could impair the friendship, right? It could harm the friendship. Obviously, when you say, okay, you're going to change your name, I'm going to go ahead and call you by your new name, that's what you do for people who you love. If you love a person and you respect a person, you accept their choices.
Not all the time.
You don't always have to agree with the choices. You don't
like
even have to.
Like if you were to say, hey, I know that my first name is this and my middle name is this, but I want you to start calling me Shaka Zulu. I'm not going to call you Shaka Zulu because that's ridiculous.
Well,
I'm gonna call you
it might be cultural appropriation too. I'm also doing
either whatever.
something
Call me
offensive,
Vulala.
Okay,
Whatever.
right.
I'm like, no, I'm going to call you Marshall. That's ridiculous.
But then
Hey,
there
Marshall.
could be a consequence for that.
That's
because
fine.
if
I don't
I'm
care.
sincere-
Because then at that point, I don't care because that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. You're the one going outside of.
It's a little bit of a straw man here, but I will say if I'm sincere in that request, I would appreciate it if you did use my ulala, whatever name, vulala. I don't remember what name you said.
Yeah.
And likewise, Scott, if you said I'm going to change my name, I want to be, this,
Good point there, Josh. Muhammad Ali.
There you go, right? You respect what people choose, especially when you love them and you care about them. So that's what.
And
that's what I
again,
think a lot of
and
this
that's what I'm
comes down
saying.
to.
Like, I was using that as just a weird out there, but I mean, if you look at someone who's like, hey, my religious beliefs require me to be called this now, I'm like,
Cassius Clay becomes Muhammad Ali.
It's like, okay.
Well, that's love and respect.
Yeah.
So why not extend that to everyone? Even
because some people don't earn it.
Jenner,
Respect is earned.
Caitlyn Jenner.
Respect is earned.
What about Caitlyn Jenner? If you met Caitlyn Jenner, would you refer to her as Caitlyn Jenner, or would you say you are him and you are Bruce Jenner?
I'd probably say Mr. Jenner.
Really? Why?
Because that's how he was born, and that's what science and biology says he is. I can't. It is, and I don't want to go, but it is. That's literally a mental disorder to mutilate your body, to go against biology, and that's not. I don't respect that.
Okay, I don't want to argue that point with you, but I see what you're saying. But you recognize then that if you take that position with this person, you could create a barrier or a wall to communication.
Yes.
Where you probably don't want one. Because you might be the person that saves this person. You might be the person that can be a wonderful friend to this person. Or maybe this person helps you and saves you. And so why do we have to die on these ideological hills, if you will, where we're like, you are only male or only female, or you are this or you are that.
Science.
I'm
going to keep throwing that at you as the atheist science person. I'm going to just keep throwing that back, how unscientific you're being.
Well, we can, again, that is another discussion, and there are responses to what you're claiming here. But what I'm trying to tell you, here, Josh Gunderson said the artist formerly known as Prince. The bottom line is, if you want to engage with the person.
You heard that, TAFCAP?
No.
The artist formerly known as Prince.
Oh. Well.
TAFKAP.
Okay.
TAFCAP. People just started calling him TAFCAP. I think that's why he went back to being called Prince.
Maybe. So if you want to engage with a person, though, on equal ground, you respect their choices. You respect you use the language that isn't going to cause a barrier between you. You use a language that will bring you closer together, even if you don't like it. Even if you don't like it. No,
quite honestly, Josh, no, you're right. Would Christ extend that respect? Honestly, face to face with a person.
Great question.
And this is, without getting into detail, this is something that I faced literally today. I can't get into any detail, but a person who, easily could have been shunned at church when this person told me why they were leery of even coming to church, to be able to say, no, you're welcomed here. You're welcomed here no matter what your past, no matter, because that's the truth. At church, when you're coming, yes, you're welcome. You're welcomed here because this is a place of healing. Church is a place of healing. If Caitlyn Jenner showed up to church saying, I want to find Christ and I want healing, that's a different story of something that I could respect. Okay, let's move forward. You come as you are. But a person standing in what I feel is unrepentance, or standing in someone saying, you're going to call me what I'm telling you to call me, because I'm like, well, no, forget it. I'm not going to succumb to your madness. But what I will do is someone who's coming and saying, I want to come and find out. I want to discover who God is. I want to discover I am on a journey of repentance. then yes, let's welcome you in. Because no matter who you are or what you've done, when you choose to repent from it, it's gone. But if you're standing in defiance, then I can't respect that.
To answer Josh's question, maybe I'm going to answer it with the question: didn't Jesus change the names of his disciples? Didn't he give them new names?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how Jesus would reply, what Jesus would do.
I mean,
would he refer to Caitlyn Jenner as Caitlyn?
I think, again, it's all about the heart, because Jesus spoke to the Pharisees and called them broods of vipers because of their heart.
Which probably isn't what the Pharisees would want to go by.
Yeah, but because of their heart. Your heart is sinful. Your heart is, you're a brood of vipers. You're calling it out. You're not repentive. You're not coming to God. You're not coming in humility. This is what you are.
How do you make the distinction then between, calling a person by using a racial word to refer to a group of people versus referring to a group of people by the name they want to be referred by?
How do you mean?
I'm trying to come up with an example that really fits without creating a logical fallacy here. But basically, why not call, let's say call blacks by the N-word? Why not? Why do you not still do that?
I never did.
Okay, good. Well, yeah, let's be clear here. Very fair. But why should a person change their language if traditionally, if they were raised that way, let's say they came from a family where that type of language was normal?
Well, again, if that word was created as a negative word.
Well, it was certainly used in that context.
Right. But was it,
it was used to oppress.
Right. So what I'm talking about political correctness is not, do we want to should we be able to offend people by calling them names that they don't want to be called? I'm more talking about political correctness in this vein. What if in 50 years people of color say it's offensive to call us African Americans? They might, but I'm saying, but that word was never created, was never brought up to put you down. And now you're saying you're offended by it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Fair.
It was a word that was done, that was basically created for the purpose of bringing that group of people more respect. Mm-hmm. So now if I think later on be offended by that, it's like, then you can't win for losing. I mean, what now you're offended by that? That wasn't, but
they might be. And so what are you going to do then?
But if a word was created to be pejorative, to be offensive, I'm not going to intentionally use a word I can think of a bunch of words to describe, blacks or Jews or Italians or, all these words that were created in a pejorative way to put someone down as an insult. Mm-hmm. Now, this is coming from a Christian who was called Christians as an insult. And the Christians, it was an insult in the Bible that said, you little Christs. It was intended as an insult, but it was seen not as an insult. Say, that's right, we should be little Christ. And it was basically co-opted by Christianity to be called Christians.
The pink triangle with the gay community.
Yeah. So, but what I'm saying is, if a word was created and intended to be offensive as an insult for someone, then that's an insulting word. Mm-hmm. It was created to be an insult. It was an insulting word. Now, if later on you want to co-opt it and say that's what you want me to call me, then okay. I mean, I guess it could be acceptable to do that, like you're saying, with the gay community, and with Christians, as I was saying. But if something was done not as an intent to be offensive, and now you're offended by it, well, that's your problem.
Okay, so let's say in 50 years, African Americans or blacks say they want to go by a completely different term. Dark-skinned Americans or something. I don't know.
Whatever.
I'm just throwing something out there as an example. Will you change your language?
Probably not.
Why not?
Because my language now is not offensive.
Well, now it's not, but you realize
and it wasn't, and my language was never, and the language I'm currently using was not created to be offensive.
You realize that language changes over time, right?
Yes.
Okay, we're all familiar with
Just
William
not my
Shakespeare.
lifetime.
We're all familiar with William Shakespeare, right? 500 years ago. A lot of people, William Shakespeare spoke and wrote in English.
Mm-hmm.
Yet today, many people would have a hard time reading or following his work because even though it's English, the language has literally changed so much in 500 years that it's almost unintelligible to some people.
Mm-hmm.
You even go back 100 years. You even go back 80 years. There's slang that people use. I mean, go back to the 20s. You love the 20s, right? You know, guys, dulls, dames, broads, right? Today, those words are technically borderline offensive, you know, but back then they were normally used.
Yeah.
And they weren't used to be offensive. They weren't considered necessarily offensive at the time.
Well, I mean, it kind of was because high society wouldn't use those words.
Well, jazz used to be a dirty word.
Yeah.
It used to literally be a 4-letter word. You didn't mention the word in polite society.
Yeah.
You know, so language changes with time.
Right.
Know?
But what I'm saying is I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about if a word was created to be offensive, then that's an offensive word.
Okay, but African American, I don't think was created to be offensive.
Right.
But let's say the community takes offense with it
then
now.
that's their problem. Honestly, that's their problem. Something that was not intended to be offensive, was not intended to put down, was intended specifically to build up and for you to now be offended by that. That's your problem.
But
that's
now,
the difference because it wasn't offensive. It wasn't created to be offensive. They weren't trying to be offensive. Now, if suddenly you're offended, that's your problem. That says more about you than it says about the people who use that term. That says more about you that suddenly now you're offended by this that was never intended to be offensive. It was never intended. Again, we go back to several of the words you were talking about that were done with the intent to put down. Mm-hmm. Then, okay, let's not use those because that was intended to be offensive. That word was created with the intent to be offensive, with the intent to control the language. But when you're doing something that is innocuous, when you're doing something that is, and specifically if you're doing something that was intended to be good and was accepted as good when it was done for someone to now be offended by that is now that person's problem. That's that person's problem who has now said, I now find this that you intended for good and that was acceptable at that time as good for me to now find that offensive. That says more about me. That's my problem. I'm twisting it now. I am now twisting something that was good into something that's bad.
Okay, even if
that's
true,
my act is twisting
you're right,
it.
even if you're correct, even if it's true, why not just say, you know what, I'm going to retrain my speech?
Because when someone is twisting something good into something bad, that's not respectful. I don't have to respect that. When someone is twisting something good into something bad, then no, I don't have to respect that.
So are you going to say Native American as opposed to indigenous, even though that's what the indigenous people would prefer you to say?
Probably.
You're
Native American is what was told to me is now a good thing and was accepted as a good thing. And this is what it is. Now, if you're suddenly offended by that, well, gosh, I'm sorry. We're not going to just keep changing this because, hey, excuse me, I'm over here. I'm offended. When we did something, when society took a step and changed like the dictionary to make something not offensive and it was accepted as non-offensive, now later on you're going to say it's offensive. That's your problem.
So what? You only get one step? What if, social change happens over time. It's incremental. Language changes. The way that we use and intend to use words. No,
that's fine. And at some point, maybe that might happen again. Mm-hmm. But you don't get to now say that I'm offending you. When I'm saying something that I accepted as good and you accepted as good, now later on for you to move the goalpost and say that's no longer good, now you got to change it again, otherwise you're offending me. If you are suddenly offended by what you had accepted before, again, that's your problem. Now, if the next generation grows up and say, hey, this is now what we want to be called, well, then they're going to grow up knowing that. But if I'm calling you this and it was not pejorative when I said it and it was acceptable to you when I said it, you can no longer say to me, well, now that's offensive to me. No, because you're moving the goalposts again. That's fine for the next generation. But for my generation, you told me this was okay. And now you're saying it's not? That's not equal. That's not fair. That's changing the rules. That's changing the gameplay.
So how many times
To go from non-offensive to go from
dictionary?
No. What I'm saying is to go from this is offensive because it was intended to be offensive to now change it to this so that we're not offended anymore. Okay, we're going to change so that you're not offended because yes, that word was created to disparage you. That word was created to put you down. This word is now created to build you up. This is good. Yes, that's good. Then later on to say, now what you created to build us up, I now find offensive. That's your problem. We took this step to go from intentional offensiveness to intentional non-offensiveness. And now to say that what we intended to do that was non-offensive, now that's no longer acceptable. That's not fair to the people who made that change. That's not fair to the people who said, we are going to take this step to make this good. Is this acceptable? Yes, this is acceptable. This is what we're going to do. This is now the word. And then later on to say, now you can no longer say that. You took that step. We said it was good. Now we're changing the rules and it's not good. Okay. That's not fair. That's moving the goalposts. That's not playing fair.
Okay, now I've dropped this word several times, the word zeitgeist. You're familiar with it now? Scott?
Yes.
Zeitgeist?
Yes.
Spirit of the times, right? Spirit of the times, along with language, also changes over time. So back in the 80s, Native American made sense. It was a reform to the way we spoke, okay, and that made a lot of sense. Today, now, 40 years later, we have another new understanding of the whole relationship. We realize that Native American did not do enough to undo the damage of 450 years of calling people Indians and all of that.
Yeah.
So sometimes we find out that the reform didn't go far enough.
Okay. I'm not saying you can't go farther. I'm saying don't hold me accountable as the person who made the change. No longer hold me accountable. Say, well, now you're offensive because you're not changing this second time. No, I'm not being offensive. I'm saying what I grew up as understanding is this is good. Now all of a sudden you're saying now you're offended by what I'm saying. That's not my problem anymore.
What is the cost to you to change your language? Why not just say, okay, you know what? You were Native American last year, this year, now and on, it's going to be indigenous. Why not just make the change?
Principle.
Okay.
Because the more political correctness that happens, the more that somebody says, now that's offensive, you can't do this, now that's offensive. Again, it's allowing somebody else to control the conversation. It's giving that person the power over you on the language that you use.
What if there's what if the word change is being proposed to bring equality in terms of power? If indigenous brings Native Americans to a greater equality with the rest of the nation in terms of racial, whatever, why not make that change? Because you're saying principle, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to change on principle. What principle would you change? Would you say, okay, I'm on board with that, I'll change? And it sounds like...
that word was intended to put you down? Yeah, well, let's not use it anymore.
Okay, so you're on board with that?
Yes.
But what if, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, we find out that a particular term is being used and that term is not... that the change we made years ago, decades ago, was not sufficient? So wouldn't you make another change?
I mean, I'm sure we might, and I know that the zeitgeist is going to require that, and I know that it's going to move on, but you don't get to say that I'm offensive. You don't get to say that when I grew up with this word being a good thing for you. And now you're offended by it. That's not fair to me.
So if your speech, let's say you are an influencer. Let's say you're an influencer.
Again,
now.
Josh, when some old cover would say colored, again, that was intended to be as a put down. That was intended. I'm not talking about those kind of words. I'm literally talking about words that were intentionally created to say, change to this because this is not offensive. Okay, let's change to this. And now this is not offensive. We're intentionally doing that to say this. And then later on to say, sorry, you're still offensive. Okay, that's not fair. That's not fair to the whole society that changed to no longer be offensive, that made the choice to no longer be offensive, to now be told, and you're still offensive. That's not fair.
Okay, I understand that you're not psychic, but once somebody explains it to you, I think you should make the effort.
And I might, I might look at the argument. I'm just saying in general, for someone to say, this is acceptable, we accept this, you've changed to make this, and now to go later on say, no, it wasn't far enough. But
that could happen.
It could happen, but don't hold it against me. I intended to do good and was doing good until you now said it's bad. That's not fair to me. That's not fair to me.
But when somebody points out to you that your thinking is insufficient or there's some error or what have you, wouldn't you then correct?
If it was necessary to correct. Okay. But that would be up to me.
Okay, so what if society said, Scott, it's indigenous now, stop using that term? Would you change?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know.
As an influencer, I would hope that you would, because again, there's also
in public, probably I would.
Mm-hmm. In public, but not in private?
I don't know. I would still think that I was doing right. Mm-hmm. Because I grew up thinking that was right. Not I grew up thinking this pejorative word was normal. No, I made a change to something right. And I grew up thinking this was right. And now you're telling me that it wasn't.
Well, we're telling you.
It still is right.
Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes I guess all I can say is that language changes, public attitudes change. Mm-hmm. I think you understand that and you follow.
Yes.
And we kind of have to go along with the herd, if you will. And there may be times when you take a principled stance. I agree. For example, if let's say 10 years from now, atheists are the majority and Christians are the minority. Mm-hmm. And atheists begin to coin some pejorative term for Christians, and that term actually becomes popular and mainstream and gets added into the dictionary. Don't look for me to use that, because I'm going to stand on principle that you have a right to your beliefs, to your faith.
But again, I would assume that because you're saying that this word was intended to be pejorative.
Precisely.
Yes.
So in that case, don't expect me to be on board. I'll gladly accept.
And don't expect me to be on board either.
Exactly. But if the move is a positive move, if we're moving towards equality and fairness, a just society, then I think you'd be on board, wouldn't you be?
I would be I'm on board to eliminating from the use in public of terms that were intended to be offensive. Mm-hmm. What I'm not against is somebody saying that now I'm offended by this term that was never intended to be offensive. Now you're just a weak person saying,
but you realize
protect me.
Things change, right? The goalposts move on their own, period. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to play the game, you got to be between the goalposts, which means you have to move. That's as simple as it gets. So language changes. You have to change your lexicon. You have to update it periodically to stay between the goalposts of society. And so I think I agree with you, the whole idea of principle.
Yeah.
I support your right to take a stand on principle. For me, the principle is going to be, I'm going to be on board with any change in language that promotes equity and justice. Mm-hmm. That's me. And I would like to hear that you would be on board for the same reason. And I think you're kind of there, but you've got this odd holdout, and then you're like...
The holdout is... what I'm against, what I'm just adamantly against, is someone saying, I'm going to now control this argument by telling you that you can't say this anymore for the purpose of controlling the argument. Mm-hmm. Well, no, I'm not going to respect that.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, and I get that. And if it's a big enough issue, that may be a hill you want to die upon. For example, if it's an abortion debate. Yeah, you're probably gonna try to control the debate by saying it's an unborn person.
Right. I always put quotes when I say assault weapon, because that was a word that was created in the 80s by news people to make a gun sound scary. It's not actually, there's no actual definition for that. There's a definition for an assault rifle, and semi-automatic firearms do not fit that definition. But assault weapon sounds scary. And so it's politically correct to say assault weapon. I don't buy that. I always put it in quotes because no, I am not going to let someone control that language and control that argument by using fake language and telling me that what I use is offensive. I'm going to stand on principle and not let you control the argument by changing the language for the purpose of controlling the argument.
Well, I agree. In a debate, if you control the language, you basically control the debate. But certainly when it comes to people in particular...
Assault rifle was Hitler's word. That's the actual Strom, whatever it is, was assault rifle. Josh is saying, no, it was Hitler's word. No, Hitler's word was assault rifle, not assault weapon. And the definition of assault rifle is a gun that has selective fire, where it can be semi-automatic or fully automatic. If it can only be semi-automatic, it's not an assault rifle. That's why they call it assault weapon, which is a fake word. So...
Okay, well... all right. So
again, that's why language is important to me. So when people are trying to politically control an argument by saying, "Well, that's politically incorrect now. You can't say that because I want to control this argument, and this term sounds better for my argument, so you can't use that term anymore." Screw you. I'm going to use that term just to offend you then. Because
no, I think if you love and respect people, and if you want to engage with them on equitable and just terms, you use the term that they prefer to use, and whether that's Native Americans now being called indigenous or any other group. If it's a person who says, I am now Muslim, I'm going to be called Muhammad instead of Cassius, what have you. I'm okay with that, and I will do everything I can to change my speech and my behavior to comfort you. So that's that. Now, that's my position, and that's how I'm going to be.
And face to face, I'm not going to do something. I'm not going to call you a name that you feel is offensive to you. And face to face, I'm not going to purposely insult you or do any of those things. But if you're going to try to change the language so that it's a better argument for you, and you want me to change the language because you want more political power, I will refute that every time. I will not play along with that game.
Okay. Well, that's that.
Yes, Josh, select fire weapon. Select fire means that you can shoot automatic or semi-automatic. Current guns that the news call assault weapons are not select fire. They're not full. You cannot select fully automatic. So to call them assault weapons is a misnomer. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So, yeah.
All right.
Language means something, and political correctness works against that.
Oh, I don't know. I think political correctness is part of language.
Political correctness wants to change the meanings of words political correctness wants to change the meanings of words for political gain.
Well, sometimes
political
gains need to be made, particularly in disenfranchised populations.
So there we are. Political correctness from a valid answer. Wow, I can't believe that time went by fast.
Yeah,
Join us tomorrow. 4:00, right here, same place, but not the same time. We're 5:00 on Sundays, 4:00 on Mondays. Change the seer and they are. Yeah, now you're modifying the gun and it's no longer the same thing. Josh, come on. I know guns, and I know what an assault weapon is and what it is not, and what an assault rifle is and what it is not. Oh, but if you change the mechanics of it, yes, now it's no longer the gun that you bought. Now it is actually something else. So, yes, but thank you for joining in the conversation, Josh. Thank you very much, everybody who's out there. Catch us Sundays at 5 right here on currentcast.com or Currentcast on Facebook. Then we also repost this to A Valid Answer on Facebook, and we love it when you join in the conversation. Continue the conversation online. We will catch you tomorrow, 4:00 on Mondays, 5:00 on Sundays. Till next time.
Thank you.
See ya.